Justice, they say it's blind, unmoved by emotion, guided only by truth. But what happens when the truth itself is buried beneath lies? In a quiet Chicago courtroom, on a gray morning that smelled of rain and regret, a man sat at the defense table, waiting for words that could end his life. His name was Marcus Reed, 29 years old, a construction worker, a son, a brother, a man who swore he was innocent. He'd already spent nearly a year behind bars, accused of a crime he didn't commit. To the world, he was guilty. To the system, he was just another case number. But to himself, he was the only one still fighting to be heard. The air inside the courtroom was suffocating, heavy with judgment and whispers. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of a camera flash felt like a countdown to the inevitable. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, silence screamed louder than any storm. He looked toward the judge, steady, cold, unreadable. And in that moment, Marcus knew his fate was seconds away. He didn't know it then, but the truth was on its way. And when it arrived, it wouldn't knock. It would crash through those courtroom doors and change everything. It was supposed to be just another sentencing day, another case, another verdict, another life decided by the weight of evidence and the swing of a gavel. But that morning, inside courtroom 204 of the Cook County Courthouse, something felt off. The atmosphere was thick, not with anticipation, but with inevitability. Everyone thought they knew how this story would end. 29-year-old Marcus Reed, a construction worker from the South Side, stood at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit borrowed from his cousin. His wrists still bore faint red marks from the cuffs that had been taken off minutes before. He looked exhausted, not from the trial, but from the months of being called a murderer. Across the courtroom, the victim's family sat in silence. Mr. Briggs' wife, a small, gray-haired woman clutching a framed photo of her husband, had cried through every day of the trial. Their son, maybe in his early 20s, glared at Marcus with eyes that burned with hatred and grief. Behind them, reporters whispered, pens poised, waiting to capture the next headline. Justice for Briggs' family at last. The jury box was empty now. Their part was done, but their verdict, guilty on all counts, still echoed in Marcus's ears like a drumbeat. The evidence, at least on paper, seemed airtight. A fingerprint on a beer bottle found behind the store. A witness who swore he saw Marcus running away that night. And that blurry surveillance footage, enough to destroy a man's life in a matter of seconds. Marcus's public defender had fought, but even she looked defeated by the end. At the front of the room sat Judge Harold Dennison, silver-haired, stern-eyed, a man who'd seen the best and worst of humanity from behind that bench. He was respected for his fairness, but feared for his lack of patience. He tapped his pen against the case file in front of him, the sound echoing through the room like a metronome counting down Marcus's freedom. In the second row, Marcus's mother, dressed in a simple blue church dress, sat trembling. Her lips moved in silent prayer, words only she and God could hear. Her hands clutched a small gold cross, the same one she wore the day Marcus was born. The bailiff's voice broke the silence. All rise to the Honorable Judge Harold Dennison. Chairs scraped, the room stood, and the judge entered. He looked over the courtroom, at the faces of the grieving, the curious, and the condemned. Then he spoke, his voice steady but heavy with finality. Be seated. And as everyone sat down, the gavel rested beside his hand, waiting for the final strike. Marcus swallowed hard. His heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to scream, to tell them all again that he was innocent, that he didn't kill anyone. But he'd said it so many times that even he could tell no one believed him anymore. In that moment, surrounded by the weight of the entire system, Marcus Reed wasn't a man anymore. He was just another case file, another conviction waiting to be sealed. And yet, deep inside, something told him this wasn't over, that the truth, whatever it was still out there, waiting to be heard. The air inside the courtroom felt suffocating, like everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Judge Harold Dennison sat forward, removing his glasses and wiping them slowly with a white handkerchief. His face was unreadable, carved from years of neutrality and discipline. Then he cleared his throat, that simple sound slicing through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Reed," he began, his voice firm and deliberate, "the jury has found you guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree and armed robbery." The words hung in the air. You could almost hear them fall, one by one, onto Marcus's shoulders. From the gallery came a gasp, sharp and involuntary, from somewhere in the victim's row. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, lips tightening as if to suppress a smile. Flashbulbs flickered in the back of the room, reporters capturing the moment of justice. Marcus didn't move. Not at first. He just stood there frozen, his hands gripping the defense table until his knuckles went white. His eyes stared straight ahead, glassy but locked with quiet defiance. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the courtroom like thunder. "I didn't do this, Your Honor." He shook his head slowly, his voice cracking but steady. "I didn't kill him. I swear to God, I didn't." For a brief second, just 1 second, Judge Dennison hesitated. His gaze met Marcus's, and in that silence, something flickered behind his eyes. Doubt? Pity? Maybe both. But then he blinked, straightened his back, and the cold mass of authority slipped back into place. "The evidence says otherwise, Mr. Reed," he said, his tone now colder, heavier. He reached for the paper in front of him, the sentence that would define a man's life. "It is the judgment of this court," he continued, "that you, Marcus Reed, be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Then came the sound, that single, devastating sound. The gavel. One strike. Final. A scream tore through the courtroom. Marcus's mother. She clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face, calling her son's name through sobs. "No, he didn't do it. My baby didn't do it." A bailiff gently held her back as she tried to rush forward. Reporters lowered their cameras for once, some looking away, uncomfortable. At the defense table, Marcus's attorney bowed her head. She had no words left, no arguments, no motions, just silence. Marcus stood there, trembling, his lips parted slightly, as if he might say something else. But nothing came, only a tear slid down his cheek, tracing the lines of exhaustion and injustice written on his face. The guard stepped forward. Metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. Marcus flinched, not from pain, but from disbelief, as they began to lead him away. He turned his head toward his mother. Their eyes met, hers full of agony, his full of silent apology. He tried to smile for her. It didn't last. The heavy courtroom doors opened with a creak, and as Marcus disappeared through them, the sound of his mother's sobs filled the empty space he left behind. And in that moment, justice had spoken, but not truth. The moment had arrived, the one no one could take back. Marcus's wrist trembled as the bailiff reached for the cuffs, the cold steel glinting under the courtroom lights. Reporters adjusted their cameras, ready to capture the image of a convicted killer led away to spend the rest of his life behind bars. And then, stop. The single word exploded through the courtroom like a gunshot. The bailiff froze mid-step. The judge's gavel hovered in midair. Every head in the room turned toward the voice. A man had stood up in the back row, his face pale, his body trembling. He looked out of place, his clothes wrinkled, his beard patchy, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. Sweat rolled down his temple as he stumbled forward, nearly tripping on the step between the benches. For a moment, no one moved. And then, in a voice that cracked with both fear and desperation, he pointed straight at Marcus. "He didn't do it." The words echoed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The man's chest heaved as he shouted again, louder this time, shaking, almost pleaded with the world to hear him. "He didn't kill Briggs." "I did." Pandemonium. The entire courtroom erupted. Gasps turned to screams. The victim's family stood in shock, mouths open, eyes darting between the stranger and the judge. Marcus's mother dropped to her knees, her hands over her mouth, whispering, "Dear God." Reporters sprang to their feet, cameras flashing, voices overlapping in a storm of chaos. "Who is that man? What did he say? Did he just confess?" Judge Dennison slammed his gavel down. "Order! Order in the court!" he roared. The gavel hit again and again, but it barely cut through the frenzy. The man kept walking forward, his voice hoarse, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "My name's Eddie Malone," he stammered, "and I can prove it." Every word hit the air like a hammer. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Bailiff, detain that man immediately." 2 bailiffs rushed toward him, but Eddie didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply raised his hands, tears now streaming down his filthy face. "Please," he said, voice breaking. "I can't let him take the fall for me. Not anymore." Marcus turned around slowly, his eyes wide, confusion and disbelief washing over him all at once. For months he'd prayed for a miracle, but never like this. He stared at the man, this broken stranger, trying to understand who he was, why he'd just destroyed his own life to save his. Eddie looked at him, guilt written across every feature. Then, almost whispering through his tears, he said the words that made the entire room fall silent again. "I was there that night. I pulled the trigger." The courtroom fell into a stunned stillness, the kind that felt alive, electric. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Judge Dennison sat back slowly, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. And for the first time in his career, he didn't know what to say. Security surged forward, hands on their holsters. But Judge Dennison lifted one hand sharply. "Let him speak," he said, voice low but commanding. The guards hesitated. The room froze again. All eyes locked on the trembling man standing in the aisle. Eddie Malone. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His lips quivered. For a moment, it looked like he might faint. Then he swallowed hard and began. "I worked with Briggs," he said, voice unsteady. "He caught me stealing from the register that night. It wasn't supposed to go like that. He tried to stop me. We struggled. I didn't mean to kill him." Gasps swept through the gallery. The victim's wife covered her mouth in horror. The reporters leaned in closer, pens scratching furiously. Eddie's eyes darted to Marcus, the man in shackles, staring back in disbelief. "He was there earlier that night," Eddie continued. "He just came to buy a beer. That's why his fingerprints were on the bottle. But he left before I pulled the trigger." His voice cracked. He looked like a man drowning in his own guilt. At the prosecutor's table, the lead attorney, a woman known for her sharpness, just froze. Her jaw tightened, papers trembling in her hands. The defense lawyer blinked repeatedly, whispering, "This can't be real." Marcus stood motionless, lips parted, eyes glossy with tears. It was as if the walls around him had crumbled, and the weight of a nightmare was finally beginning to lift. Judge Dennison leaned forward slightly, his tone now more measured. "Why are you saying this now, Mr. Malone?" Eddie looked down at his shaking hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because I can't live with it anymore." He paused, trembling harder with every word. "I saw the news, the headlines, the interviews. I saw this man's mother crying on TV, saying her son was innocent." His lips quivered. "I thought I could ignore it. I thought time would make it fade. But it didn't. It never did." He wiped his face with his sleeve, leaving streaks of tears and grime. "I tried to drink it away. I tried to forget it. But every night, I hear Briggs's voice. I see his face. And I see this man." He gestured toward Marcus. "Rotting for something I did." He took a shaky breath and slowly reached into the inside pocket of his worn-out jacket. A ripple of tension passed through the courtroom. Security stiffened, ready to move. But when Eddie's hand emerged, it wasn't with a weapon. It was with a small, silver pendant. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. It glinted faintly under the fluorescent light, stained with something dark and dried. Eddie's voice dropped to a whisper. This was Briggs's. He wore it every day. I kept it. I don't even know why. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe as punishment. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the sound of the air conditioner seemed to fade away. Judge Dennison leaned back slowly, his eyes locked on the pendant. The faint trace of blood visible even from the bench. The prosecutor's mouth fell open, realization dawning in her eyes. Marcus's mother clutched her chest, sobbing softly. Marcus himself looked like a man caught between disbelief and release, his entire world spinning as truth finally cracked open a lie that had buried him. Eddie lowered his head, whispering through tears, I'm so sorry. The moment Eddie's confession ended, Judge Dennison slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking through confusion like lightning. Recess. 10 minutes. Everyone out now. But 10 minutes wasn't nearly enough. What unfolded next would change everything. The courtroom transformed into a whirlwind. Prosecutors huddled together, their once perfect case unraveling in real time. Detectives flooded in, murmuring urgently to one another. Reporters bolted from the gallery. Phones pressed to their ears, breaking the story live. Breaking news. Man confesses to murder during sentencing of wrongly convicted defendant. Marcus sat at the defense table, wrists still bound, his breathing shallow. His lawyer, trembling with disbelief, whispered, "Marcus, I think this is it. This is the moment." Across the room, Marcus's mother prayed softly, her tears falling onto the wrinkled Bible she clutched to her chest. Within hours, the investigation moved like wildfire. Eddie Malone was taken into custody, and what they found was undeniable. The silver pendant he produced bore Daniel Briggs's DNA, dried, decades-old traces matching the crime scene. Detectives reopened old evidence files, and there it was, a discarded handgun found weeks after the murder, logged as inconclusive. When they retested it, Eddie's fingerprints covered the grip, the murder weapon, the final piece of the puzzle. Every report, every statement, every supposed fact that had damned Marcus began to crumble, one brick at a time. That night, news networks ran the story nonstop. Clips of Marcus's stunned face looped across every channel. Wrong man convicted. Real killer confesses in courtroom drama. The city buzzed with outrage and disbelief. By morning, the courtroom was packed again, this time with new faces, new cameras, and a different kind of tension. Not a condemnation, but of reckoning. When the session resumed, the air was thick with anticipation. Judge Dennison returned to the bench slowly, his usually confident stride replaced by something heavier, guilt. The courtroom fell silent as he adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Marcus Reed. His voice, once steady and commanding, now trembled with the weight of shame. "Mr. Reed," he began softly, "this court, the system, owes you more than words can offer." He paused, looking down at the papers before him, the same ones that once condemned an innocent man. He exhaled deeply, his voice cracking. "You were failed by the investigation, by the evidence, and by me. What was taken from you can never be returned, but I will see that your name is cleared immediately." Marcus stared at him, speechless. His lips parted, but no words came out. His mother sobbed behind him, whispering, "Thank you, Lord, thank you." The courtroom sat in absolute silence, the kind that feels sacred, like the whole world had stopped to breathe again. Judge Dennison's hand trembled slightly as he set down the case file, the same file that had nearly destroyed an innocent man's life. "Mr. Reed," he said softly, eyes glistening, "you walked into this courtroom accused. You leave it today as a free man." As Marcus was unshackled, the chains clinking softly against the floor, the cameras clicked like fireworks. But Marcus didn't look at them. He turned toward Eddie, now seated in cuffs, and for a brief moment their eyes met. No hatred, no revenge, just quiet, exhausted humanity. When the gavel fell again, it didn't echo like judgment. It rang like freedom. Judge Dennison's final words hung in the air, as if the walls themselves needed time to absorb them. "This court hereby overturns the conviction of Marcus Reed." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the guard stepped forward, but this time not to take him away. The heavy clink of handcuffs, unlocking, broke the silence. The chains that had bound him for nearly a year slipped from his wrists and hit the floor with a dull metallic thud. Marcus stared at them. The marks they had left, the skin rubbed raw, as if seeing physical proof of everything stolen from him. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just stood there, still frozen, as if his mind couldn't believe his body was free. His mother rose from the gallery, her knees weak, her face trembling. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice cracking. And before he could even turn fully toward her, she was in his arms, clutching him so tightly it was as though she feared the world might try to take him again. She sobbed into his chest, the sound raw, unrestrained, echoing to the courtroom that had once condemned her son. Marcus's hands shook as he wrapped his arms around her. For the first time in months, he felt something real, warmth. The room filled with noise, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Marcus, how does it feel to be free? Do you forgive the system? Will you sue the state? He looked up, eyes red but steady, his voice calm, almost too calm. I told them I was innocent, he said softly. Nobody listened. He glanced toward Judge Dennison, then at the crowd of strangers who had just witnessed his freedom. Maybe now they will. As he passed the benches, the courtroom rose to its feet. Some clapped, some cried. Even the officers, hardened, stoic men, stood silent in respect. Marcus didn't turn back. He walked toward the sunlight streaming through the courthouse doors, the first sunlight he'd seen as a free man in almost a year. Outside, the world erupted, news vans, flashing bulbs, chaos. But for Marcus Reed, all he could hear was the sound of his mother's heartbeat still echoing against his chest. Sometimes justice arrives too late, but when it does, it still has the power to set a soul free. Eddie Malone didn't resist. When the officers approached, he simply lifted his hands. No words, no fight. For the first time in years, he looked almost at peace. As they read him his rights, he nodded slowly, whispering, I know. The courtroom watched as he was led away. The real killer, the man who carried a guilt so heavy it finally crushed him into confession. And though his wrists were cuffed, his steps were steady, like a man who had finally stopped running from himself. 2 weeks later, Eddie stood before the same judge, Judge Harold Dennison, and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed robbery. The courtroom that once mourned injustice now sat in stunned silence as the truth was officially sealed into record. But for Judge Dennison, the weight didn't lift. In chambers that night, he sat alone, staring at Marcus Reed's case file spread open across his desk. The verdict papers, the transcripts, the exhibits, all proof that even the system he had sworn to uphold could fail. For 25 years, he had been the embodiment of control, composure, confidence in the law. But after this, that faith was shaken. He penned a short letter to the judicial board the following week, a request to step away from criminal trials indefinitely. He wrote, I need time to remember why I became a judge, not just to punish wrong, but to protect the innocent. And Marcus, he didn't hold a press conference. He didn't file a lawsuit. He didn't chase headlines or seek revenge. He simply stood on the courthouse steps, the same steps where months earlier he had been dragged and wearing shackles, and closed his eyes. The breeze brushed his face. The sunlight warmed his skin, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he breathed freely. Reporters shouted from a distance, but he didn't turn around. He whispered, barely audible, Thank you, God, for the truth. Behind him, the courthouse loomed, grand, unfeeling, eternal. But for Marcus Reed, it was no longer a place of judgment. It was a place where truth had finally fought its way to the surface and won. Justice nearly failed that day. But truth, no matter how buried, found its way back. And for one innocent man, freedom didn't come from mercy. It came from confession. Justice isn't always perfect. It can be swayed by evidence, clouded by fear, blinded by assumption. Sometimes it bends, and sometimes it breaks. But on that day, inside that courtroom, truth refused to stay silent. It clawed its way out of guilt, out of darkness, out of the cracks of a broken system. And it spoke. One man lost nearly everything. His time, his freedom, his faith in the world. But what he gained back was the only thing that truly mattered. His name.